right, so get this. You guys sent in a ton of stuff for this. Deep dive articles, documents, even social media posts. And
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
it looks like we're going way deeper than I expected with this one. We're tackling a spiritual group, their leader, and a whole network that touches politics and international business.
Buckle up. We're going to be exploring the Science of Identity Foundation, which you'll often see abbreviated as SOI, and its leader, Chris Butler, who, well, he also goes by Jagat Guru Sasabarupananda Paramahamsa.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot to unpack. So can you give us a little context on these Sanskrit titles? I mean, what's the significance here?
Well, the Sanskrit definitely adds a layer of complexity, right? I mean, the use of these titles points to the group's roots in Hinduism and the Hare Krishna movement, but there's a twist.
Okay, a twist. Intriguing. So where do we even begin with this Chris Butler?
Well, his background is pretty fascinating. Think like 1960s Hawaii, surfing and a nickname like Top Hat. But then his life takes kind of a sharp turn when he gets involved with the Hare Krishna movement.
So he went from riding waves to leading a spiritual group. That's quite a transformation.
It is, and it's essential to understanding the Science of Identity Foundation. He drew inspiration from Hinduism and the Hare Krishna movement, but developed his own unique system, which he ultimately formalized as SOI.
So is it not your typical Hare Krishna group then?
Not exactly. There were disagreements, about Butler's interpretations and his approach to the teachings. He actually had a pretty contentious relationship with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who was the founder of the Hare Krishna movement.
Okay, so some tension there already. So what is some of the key differences in Butler's teachings? What makes his system stand out?
Well, he puts a lot of emphasis on meditation and yoga, which are, familiar practices to many spiritual seekers. But his real focus is on what he calls discovering the true self. He argues that this true self is distinct from our material identities, and realizing it is the key to liberation.
Yeah, that idea of a true self definitely resonates with a lot of spiritual traditions. Is there something unique about how Butler approaches it?
Well, he frames it as a science, hence the name Science of Identity, right? He presents a systematic approach to self-discovery, emphasizing introspection and meditation, and aligning oneself with the divine.
As you're explaining this, I was thinking about how this idea of a true self could be both appealing and potentially vulnerable to manipulation.
That's a really good point. That desire to connect with a deeper sense of self is a powerful motivator, and it's something that spiritual leaders can tap into. I think it's crucial to examine these teachings critically, considering both their potential benefits and the possibility of exploitation, for sure.
For sure. Okay, so we've got this foundation focused on discovering the true self, led by this former surfer turned spiritual leader with a somewhat controversial past. What else should we know about the Science of Identity Foundation as an organization?
One thing that really stands out from the sources is their secretive nature. They're not your typical out-in-the-open spiritual group. They've actually been called the most secretive religion in Hawaii.
Wow, the most secretive religion in Hawaii. That's quite a label. What makes them so secretive?
Well, their meditation and yoga centers often operate under different names. Like you might see the Australian School of Meditation or Mantra Meditation. It's not immediately obvious that these centers are connected to SOI.
So they're kind of flying under the radar.
Exactly. And it seems like they use these centers as their primary recruiting grounds, but they also do outreach in public spaces like libraries, community centers, even organic farms through the WWOF program, which is like a network for volunteers on organic farms.
Wow. So it seems like they're strategically targeting different demographics with these approaches.
Yeah. Think about it. Someone looking to connect with their spiritual side might be drawn to a meditation center, while someone who's into sustainable living might encounter them through WSOFing. It's a very subtle way of introducing people to their teachings.
That's fascinating. Okay, so they're not exactly shouting their affiliation from the rooftops.
Yeah.
So what are their teachings like? What do they actually focus on?
One of the key practices they emphasize is chanting. Devotees chant mantras, often for hours at a time, as a way to connect with the divine. And they practice bhakti yoga, which is a path of devotion and surrender to a higher power, which in this case is Krishna.
Right. Makes sense considering their roots in the Hare Krishna movement. Is there anything else that's distinctive about their teachings?
Well, one concept that pops up in the research is subliminal indoctrination. Now, this is a term used by some critics of the group.
Subliminal indoctrination. That sounds a little intense. What does it mean?
Essentially, it refers to the idea that Soe subtly exposes people to their teachings without explicitly revealing their full doctrine or their connection to Chris Butler.
Mhm.
For example, they might invite people to chanting sessions or offer them prasadam, which is food that's been ritually offered to Krishna. It's a way of creating a positive association with their practices.
I see. It's almost like a soft introduction, easing people into their beliefs without overwhelming them.
Right. Exactly. And this approach is particularly evident in their business ventures, which operate as both commercial enterprises and subtle recruitment tools.
Okay, now that's interesting. So they're running businesses as well.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One of the biggest ones is Wailana Yoga. It's a successful yoga brand, but the interesting part is that it features Chris Butler's chanting credited under the name Siddha. They also have a company called Ajita's Veg Chips, which targets a broader health-conscious audience.
Wow, so they've managed to integrate their teachings into seemingly mainstream products. It's a pretty clever strategy, even if it raises some questions about transparency. You wouldn't necessarily know that you're supporting a specific spiritual group by buying yoga videos or veggie chips.
You're absolutely right. It blurs the lines between spiritual practice, business, and marketing. And, this lack of transparency is something that we see in many aspects of SA. Even just basic information about Chris Butler and the inner workings of the organization is hard to come by. He rarely gives interviews or makes public statements.
So we've got this elusive leader, a secretive organization, and a web of businesses and recruitment tactics. It sounds like we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh, yeah. And it gets even more complex when we start exploring Sorabai's connections to politics, particularly in Hawaii.
Yeah, because tucked away in these sources is the name Tulsi Gabbard. And she's definitely not someone who shies away from the public eye.
Right. Gabbard, who served as a U.S. representative and even ran for president, publicly identifies as a Hindu and a follower of Chris Butler.
So we're talking about a connection between this spiritual group and someone who's held significant political office. That's a pretty big deal.
It is. And it goes beyond just Tulsi. Her family is deeply involved with Soraway. Her father, Mike Gabbard, is a Hawaii state senator, and her mother, Carol Gabbard, was a member of the Hawaiian Board of Education.
Wow, so it sounds like this isn't just a casual interest in Butler's teachings. It seems like a pretty integral part of their lives.
It does, and it's not just the Gabbards. Several other politicians in Hawaii, like Rick Reed and Wayne Nishiki, have also been linked to SOA. It raises questions about the extent of the group's influence in Hawaiian politics.
Hold on. Are we suggesting that this group is actively trying to influence the political landscape?
Well, there are allegations that Mike Gabbard's political campaigns received a significant amount of funding from SOI members. And this is particularly interesting because publicly he identified as Catholic during his campaigns. Some people see that as a contradiction.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant discrepancy. It definitely raises some eyebrows.
It does. And there are claims that Chris Butler actively encourages his followers to enter politics and take up government positions as a way to shape policy. It suggests a more deliberate strategy than simply having a few individuals who happen to follow his teachings holding office.
Okay, so we're starting to see how this web of influence extends beyond just spirituality and into the realm of politics. It makes you wonder about the motivations behind this involvement. Is it about promoting specific policies, gaining power, or is it something else entirely?
Those are great questions, and the answers might be more complicated than we think. It's important to remember that people's motivations are often multifaceted. It's rarely about just one thing. We'll have to keep digging to get a better understanding of what's driving Selai's political aspirations.
Okay, this is already getting pretty intense and we're just getting started. Where do we go from here?
Well, in addition to politics, we need to delve into some pretty unsettling allegations about the inner workings of the Science of Identity Foundation, allegations of abuse and manipulation within the group.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You're talking about those accounts from former members.
Right.
Right, the ones who paint a pretty dark picture of what life is like inside.
Yes. Several former members have come forward to describe a really harsh and controlling environment within the group, which is quite different from the peaceful image that a lot of spiritual groups try to project.
What kind of things are we talking about specifically?
Well, there are claims of punishment and humiliation for those who displease Chris Butler. Some even describe being banished from the group entirely for stepping out of line.
Wow, that's a pretty extreme reaction. It's hard to reconcile that with the idea of a spiritual leader who's guiding people toward enlightenment.
Yeah, it is a stark contrast. And it's not just hearsay either. There are recordings of Butler's own lectures where he uses really demeaning language and criticizes his followers quite harshly.
So it's his own words that are corroborating these claims of harsh treatment.
In part, yes. And it gets even more concerning. There are accounts that Soterai encourages isolation from non-devotees. They promote this idea that associating with outsiders is dangerous to one's spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
This is a tactic we see in a lot of groups that are accused of being cults.
Right, because if you're constantly being told that the outside world is a threat, you're more likely to become dependent on the group and on the leader.
Exactly. And that dependency seems to be a key part of Sowai's structure. Devotees often live codependently, sharing houses and being subject to Butler's control. It creates a very insular environment where dissenting voices are often silenced.
Man, this is getting pretty heavy. It's hard to believe that this is all happening under the guise of a spiritual organization.
It is unsettling. And just when you think it can't get any more complicated, we encounter the story of Patrick Bowler, who went by Paramahamsa Das within Sowai. He's a former follower of Butler who was involved in some very shady activities.
Oh, right. I remember reading about him. What was this story again?
Well, he was involved in drug trafficking and actually served time in prison. It's not exactly the kind of activity you'd associate with spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah, that's a pretty big red flag. What was his role within Sowai?
He played a role in supporting the Sowai Brahmachari School in Baguio, Philippines. It's a school for young boys who are dedicated to studying Butler's teachings.
Wait, so a convicted drug trafficker was involved in supporting a school for children?
It seems that way, yes. And this case highlights the contradictions within Sowai. On the one hand, they present themselves as a spiritual group focused on self-realization and ethical living. On the other hand, you have individuals like Bowler who engage in illegal activities.
It makes you wonder about the boundaries within the group, the extent to which they condone or condemn certain behaviors, and whether there's a disconnect between their professed values and the actions of their members.
Absolutely. And as if drug trafficking wasn't concerning enough, there's another layer to this story that might be even more alarming. Sowai's connection to a company called QNet.
Okay, this is where things start to feel a little too close to home. QNet, isn't that a multi-level marketing company? The kind that's often accused of running pyramid schemes.
You got it. QNet is a multi-level marketing company that's been accused of operating pyramid schemes and engaging in unethical business practices. They've been investigated in several countries, including India, where authorities took legal action against them.
So this is serious stuff. And how does the Science of Identity Foundation connect to a company like QNet?
Well, it turns out that Joseph Bismark, a high-ranking figure in QNet, has deep connections to Sowai.
Wait, so we're connecting a spiritual leader to a multi-level marketing scheme that's been accused of being a pyramid scheme. How does that even make sense?
It's a strange connection for sure. Bismarck owns properties in Kailua, Oahu, that Chris Butler and his disciples use. And get this, on his Google Plus page, he lists his education as the Science of Identity University.
The Science of Identity University. I've never even heard of that. Is that a real thing?
It's not an accredited university in the traditional sense. It seems to be more of an internal educational program within Sowai.
So it's like their own self-made institution. That's interesting. And it further solidifies the link between Bismarck, QNet, and the Science of Identity Foundation.
It does, and it raises a lot of questions. Is there a financial relationship between QNet and Sowai? Are they using Sowai members as a recruitment pool for their multi-level marketing scheme? These are all things that warrant further investigation.
Okay, so we've got spiritual teachings, political connections, allegations of abuse, and now ties to a potentially shady business operation. It's a lot to take in.
It is, and it all circles back to Chris Butler and his elusive nature. He rarely gives interviews, making it very difficult to verify claims about him or the organization. It's like he's deliberately shrouded in secrecy.
It's frustrating. We're trying to piece together this puzzle, and the central figure is practically a ghost.
Right. Much of the information we have comes from former members and critics, which naturally leads to conflicting accounts. It's hard to separate fact from fiction, which makes this deep dive all the more challenging.
It's like trying to see through a fog.
Yeah.
So much is unclear, and that lack of transparency makes it really hard to know what to believe.
It does make it difficult to get a clear picture, that's for sure. Yeah, it does make it difficult to get a clear picture, that's for sure.
Okay, so we're back for part 2 of this deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. And last time we explored Chris Butler's background, the secretive nature of Sowai, their, well, intriguing recruitment tactics, and their unexpected connections to politics and business.
It's a wild story, isn't it?
It really is.
We've only just begun to unravel the complexities of this whole thing. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and with each layer, we just uncover more well, intriguing and sometimes unsettling details.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say, even after all that, I'm still grappling with how this group has managed to operate under the radar for so long, especially with their involvement in politics.
Right. It's a testament to their ability to adapt and evolve their strategies over time.
Like a chameleon.
Kinda, yeah. Remember, they started with their own political party back in the 1970s.
The Independence for Godly Government.
Yes, which, well, it was short-lived, but it demonstrated their early interest in influencing the political landscape.
It's like they've learned to be more subtle in their approach, working from within the system rather than trying to create their own.
Precisely. And that subtlety is evident in the way they encourage their followers to get involved in politics. It's not about overt campaigning or pushing a specific agenda, but rather about infiltrating existing structures and subtly influencing policy from within.
Sneaky.
Kind of, yeah. And they've had some success with that approach, especially in Hawaii, where several politicians have been linked to SOI. But that raises the question of transparency. Should voters be aware of these affiliations? Does it matter if a politician's personal beliefs, potentially shaped by a group like SOI, influence their decision-making?
Right, yeah, those are some big questions to consider. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. On the one hand, we value the separation of church and state, the idea that religious beliefs shouldn't dictate public policy. But on the other hand, we also recognize that personal values inevitably shape a politician's worldview and approach to governance.
For sure. So it's a delicate balance between respecting individual beliefs and ensuring that those beliefs don't unduly influence decisions that affect the broader public.
Exactly. And it becomes even more complicated when you consider the allegations that Czaitanii actively encourages its members to seek positions of power. Is this a genuine desire to serve the community or a more strategic attempt to advance the group's interests?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a question that deserves further scrutiny. And speaking of scrutiny, we can't ignore those disturbing allegations of abuse and manipulation within. So
Yeah, those are hard to sweep under the rug.
they really are. These allegations are incredibly serious and require careful consideration. We need to delve into the experiences of former members, examine the evidence they presented, and try to understand the dynamics that might have contributed to this alleged culture of abuse.
Right, because it's pretty hard to reconcile the image of a peaceful spiritual group with claims of punishment, humiliation, and even banishment for those who displease Chris Butler.
It's tough. It's a stark contrast. And it raises questions about the nature of power and authority within SOI. Is Butler a benevolent spiritual guide, as his followers believe? Or is there a darker side to his leadership, one that involves control, manipulation, and the suppression of dissent?
It's almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And remember those recorded lectures where Butler berates and belittles his followers? Those were pretty chilling to listen to.
Yeah, those are hard to forget. They were rough.
They really were. Those recordings provide a glimpse into Butler's leadership style, one that seems to be characterized by criticism control and a real disdain for those who question his authority.
It's a far cry from the image of a compassionate spiritual teacher guiding his students toward enlightenment.
It is, and it makes you wonder about the psychological impact of this kind of leadership on the followers. How does this constant criticism and fear of punishment affect their sense of self-worth and their ability to think critically?
I would imagine it's not good.
Yeah.
It's like they're trapped in this cycle of seeking approval and fearing retribution, which makes it even harder to break free from the group's influence.
Exactly. And this dynamic is further reinforced by SOI's emphasis on isolation from the outside world. They create this us versus them mentality, portraying non-devotees as threats to spiritual well-being.
It's a classic cult tactic, isolating members from their support networks and making them more dependent on the group for validation and belonging.
Precisely. And this isolation makes it even more difficult for people to leave, even if they're experiencing abuse or disillusionment. They've been conditioned to believe that the outside world is dangerous and that they need the group for protection.
It's really sad. It's a heartbreaking situation, and it highlights the power of group dynamics and the potential for manipulation, especially within groups that claim to offer spiritual enlightenment or a path to self-discovery.
It's true. It's a stark reminder that we need to be discerning in our choices and critical in our thinking, even when it comes to matters of faith and spirituality. Blind faith can be dangerous, and it's crucial to question authority, seek multiple perspectives, and trust our own intuition.
Well said. And speaking of questioning authority, let's revisit SOI's connection to QNet, that multi-level marketing company accused of operating as a pyramid scheme. It's a puzzling connection, to say the least.
It is. And the more we dig, the more questions arise. How did this relationship between a spiritual group and a controversial business enterprise even come about? What are the motivations behind it? And what are the implications for both SOI and its members?
Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher. We've already established that Joseph Bismarck, a high-ranking figure in QNet, has deep connections to SOI. Remember how he listed the Science of Identity University as part of his education on his Google Plus page?
Yeah, how could I forget?
Right, it's like their paths have been intertwined for a while.
Exactly. And not only that, he also owns properties in Hawaii that are used by Butler and his followers. There's definitely a tangible connection there.
It sounds like a pretty close relationship. And there was something else in the sources, something about a birthday celebration, right?
Yes. This was a fascinating detail that I came across. One of the sources has transcripts of a recording from Chris Butler's birthday celebration in 1993.
A birthday party.
Yes.
1993. Okay, I'm curious what's so special about this recording.
Well, guess who's the first person listed as offering their respects and prayers to Chris Butler on this recording?
Let me guess, Joseph Bismarck.
You got it.
Mhm.
It seems their connection goes way back, which further solidifies the link between SOI and QNet.
Wow. Okay, so now we have this whole other layer of complexity. It's not just a casual connection. It sounds like a long-standing relationship.
It does, and it raises a lot of questions about the nature of their connection, whether there's any financial entanglement, and whether SOI members are being encouraged to participate in QNet's multi-level marketing scheme.
This deep dive is already so twisty. Who knew a spiritual group could be linked to politics, potential pyramid schemes, and a convicted drug trafficker?
You never know what you're going to find when you start digging. And just when you think you've seen it all, something else pops up that throws a whole new wrench into the works.
It makes you wonder how much more is going on beneath the surface. How many more connections and stories are waiting to be uncovered?
Exactly. And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. We're piecing together a puzzle, and sometimes the pieces don't seem to fit at first. But as we keep exploring, we start to see how they connect in unexpected ways.
It's a real rabbit hole.
It is, and we're not done yet. There's still more to explore, including SOI's finances, their organizational structure, and the international reach of their operations. We'll delve into those aspects in part 3 of this deep dive.
I'm on the edge of my seat. This has been a wild ride so far, and I can't wait to see what else we uncover. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue our exploration of the Science of Identity Foundation and try to piece together this complex and fascinating puzzle.
Yeah, it's a real rabbit hole.
So welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. We've covered so much already, from Chris Butler's, well, unconventional journey to the group's subtle recruitment tactics, their political connections, and those troubling allegations of abuse and manipulation.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? I mean, we've uncovered this complex web of influence, explored the group's controversial business ties, and grappled with the ethical implications of their practices. And yet there's still so much we don't know, Chris Butler. And so I just remain shrouded in secrecy, making it really difficult to fully understand their motivations and their impact on the lives of their followers.
It's true. It's like we put together this puzzle, but some of the key pieces are just missing. We're left with more questions than answers, which is frustrating, but also incredibly intriguing at the same time.
Absolutely. It just reminds us that there are always multiple perspectives to consider and that truth is often elusive. But even with the limited information we have, we can still draw some tentative conclusions and gain a deeper understanding of this enigmatic group.
Okay, so what are some of the key takeaways then from our exploration of SOI? What insights have emerged from this deep dive?
Well, one of the most striking takeaways for me is the power of belief and the allure of spiritual seeking Butler's teachings. Despite their unconventional nature and the secrecy surrounding them, they've resonated with a significant number of people, including some who've attained positions of influence.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the human need for meaning and belonging. That search for something that transcends the ordinary and provides a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And for many, SOI seems to offer that sense of purpose, that connection to something larger than themselves. It gives them a framework for understanding the world, a community of like-minded individuals, and a path to self-discovery, even if that path is potentially, fraught with challenges and contradictions.
It's a good reminder that we shouldn't underestimate the human need for connection and belonging. That desire to be a part of something that feels meaningful and transformative. And that need, it can make people vulnerable to manipulation, especially when it's exploited by charismatic leaders or groups with hidden agendas.
Yeah, that's an important point. And it brings us back to the ethical implications of Sowai's practices. The allegations of abuse, control, and isolation, they raise some serious concerns about the well-being of their members and the potential for harm.
Right. I mean, we can't ignore the voices of those who've spoken out against Sowai, who share their experiences of pain, disillusionment, and the challenges of breaking free from the group's influence. Their stories, I mean, they serve as a cautionary tale, reminding us to be critical of authority, to question our beliefs, and to prioritize our own well-being.
Yeah, their courage in speaking out is commendable, and their experiences provide valuable insights into the dynamics of groups that can become so insular and potentially harmful. It's a good reminder that even organizations that present themselves as, spiritual or benevolent, they can have a dark side.
It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Sometimes that desire to do good to help others or to create a better world, it can lead to unintended consequences, especially when combined with unchecked power and a lack of accountability.
That's a profound observation. It highlights the importance of critical thinking, transparency, and ethical leadership, not just in spiritual organizations, but in all aspects of our lives.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of belief, the allure of spiritual seeking, the potential for manipulation, and the ethical concerns surrounding Somai. But there's one element of this story that I just keep coming back to, and that's the enduring mystery of Chris Butler himself.
Yeah, he remains an enigma. He's both charismatic and elusive, revered by his followers, but shrouded in secrecy.
We've gotten these glimpses of his personality through his teachings, his recorded lectures, and the accounts of former members. But we're still left with so many questions. What are his true motivations? What does he really believe? And what's the end game for Sowai?
Those are questions that, only Butler himself can really answer. But his silence, his refusal to engage with the outside world, it only deepens the mystery and fuels speculation.
It's like he's deliberately cultivating this aura of mystique, using secrecy as a tool to maintain control and avoid scrutiny.
It's a strategy that's worked for him so far, but it also raises questions about his accountability and the transparency of Sowai's operations. If there's nothing to hide, why all the secrecy?
Yeah, it's a question that lingers, even as we wrap up this deep dive. We've explored the complexities of Sowai, but the true nature of Chris Butler and his ultimate goals remain elusive.
Perhaps that's part of the allure for his followers, the sense that he holds these secrets, that he possesses a wisdom that's beyond the reach of ordinary people. It's a powerful draw, especially for those seeking answers and guidance in a world that often feels so chaotic and uncertain.
It's like he's become a symbol, a projection of their own desires and aspirations. And as long as he remains shrouded in mystery, that symbol can retain its power.
It's a fascinating dynamic, the interplay between faith, mystery, and the human need for meaning. And it's a reminder that truth is often multifaceted and subjective, shaped by our beliefs, our experiences, and our interpretations.
This deep dive, it's been a journey of discovery, a process of peeling back the layers and trying to make sense of a complex and often contradictory story. We've encountered some fascinating individuals, explored some really intriguing connections, and grappled with ethical dilemmas.
It's been thought-provoking for sure. And it's left me with a renewed appreciation for the importance of critical thinking, the value of diverse perspectives, and the need for transparency and accountability, not just in spiritual organizations, but in all aspects of our lives.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We focused on Sowai, but their story is just one example of a broader phenomenon, the allure of groups and leaders that promise easy answers, certainty, and a sense of belonging.
It's a phenomenon that's been around for centuries, and it's likely to continue as long as humans seek meaning and connection in a world that often feels fragmented and uncertain. So the question is, how do we navigate this landscape? I mean, how do we discern between genuine seekers of truth and those who might exploit our vulnerabilities?
That's a big question. It's one that requires ongoing reflection and discernment. But I think a few things to keep in mind are: be wary of groups that isolate their members, demand unquestioning obedience, or demonize outsiders. Seek out diverse perspectives, question authority, and trust your own intuition. And remember that true spiritual growth, it often involves questioning, challenging, and evolving our beliefs, not blindly accepting dogma or surrendering our autonomy.
Those are wise words. It's about finding a balance between skepticism and openness, between critical thinking and compassion. It's about recognizing that there are no easy answers, no one-size-fits-all solutions, and that the journey of self-discovery is a lifelong process of learning, growing, and evolving.
It's a journey that's best traveled with an open mind, a discerning heart, and a willingness to embrace the complexities and uncertainties of life. Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Science of Identity Foundation. It's been an intriguing and thought-provoking exploration, and we hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue your own explorations of the world around you.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep. There's always more to discover, more to understand, and more to appreciate about the human experience.
Until next time, stay curious.